He thought he was choosing the successful side of the family. He thought his rich son-in-law was the safest bet, the man who could protect his lifestyle and status. So he turned his back on his own daughter on the most important day of her life. But when the truth came out, the man he trusted was a fraud, and the daughter he ignored was the one with real strength. The lesson is simple. Never trade love for money, because fake gold always loses its shine. Please support our channel with 1 like and 1 share. Thanks for watching.
The wood sander buzzed, then fell silent. I ran my hand over the finished walnut tabletop, smooth as glass. A gift from my sister, Sophie. A joke, really a warped piece of lumber she thought was unusable. You have to see the bigger picture, Ava. My father S. voice echoed from the phone on my workbench. He sounded a million miles away. Sophie S. having a tough quarter with Julian. Seeing you so successful. With your own business, it's just not great timing. I can to give you away if she S. in the front row feeling like a failure. My wedding was in 3 days a short 72 hours, and my dad was ditching me. It wasn't an emergency, it wasn't a cancelled flight. He was backing out because my happiness was an inconvenience to his preferred daughter. Your father S. right, dear? My mother S. voice chirped on the line. I could just see her arranging flowers in their perfect Boston brownstone. Just have the efficient do it. It's S. what independent women prefer these days. It's not a big deal. You think your family will be your safety net. You wrong. Sometimes the people who should catch you are the ones who give you the final push. If you've ever been sidelined so someone else could steal your moment, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. Share your own story down in the comments. I read everyone. I am your host, and you rewatching Final. Notice the story you've been waiting for. I set the sander down on the bench. No screaming, no begging. No asking how they could sabotage my wedding to coddle a 30-year-old SS ego. The person who would have begged 10 years ago was gone, replaced by someone with a spine of steel. My mind flashed to a crowded school gymnasium. I was 14, standing beside a handcrafted bookshelf that had just won the citywide woodworking competition. A blue ribbon was pinned to the top shelf. Next to my project were 2 empty seats. My parents missed it because Sophie had a last-minute piano lesson across town. This wasn't a new betrayal, just a more public one. Okay, I said, my voice ice-cold and steady. I understand. A wave of audible relief washed through the phone. Oh, thank you. You were always the practical one, Ava. We'll pop in for the ceremony and leave right after. We have to help Sophie set up for her big anniversary gala that night. I'll see you Saturday, I replied, and ended the call. Then I opened my phone again. My thumb found a password-protected app, opening a file I'd been curating for the past 6 months. The folder was simply labelled Leverage. I uploaded the recording of our call, and the progress bar filled instantly. Outside my workshop, a cold Boston wind rattled the windows. I was 29, the owner of a bespoke furniture company my family dismissed as my cute little hobby. I was used to the chill. I actually thrived in it. I opened my texts and found Ethan. Ethan Cole, the man I was about to marry. To my family, Ethan was just a history professor with a worn-out tweed jacket and a love for dusty old books, nothing compared to Sophia's high-flying husband. They had no idea who Ethan really was. They never cared enough to ask. I sent him a quick text. Dad's not walking me down the aisle. He says Sophie would feel upstaged. I put the phone down, expecting a call or a long paragraph of support. 30 seconds later, my phone lit up with a single message. Ethan didn't offer pity. He didn't text his anger. The message simply said, "Don't worry, I've got the perfect wedding gift for them." To understand why my father would torpedo my wedding, you have to know my family's currency. And that currency has a name, Julian. My brother-in-law, Julian Vance, was a hedge fund manager, the kind who wore designer tracksuits to brunch and made sure everyone saw the logo on his car keys. He bankrolled my parents' entire life. He paid for their country club dues. He covered the payments on my mother's new luxury sedan. In exchange, my parents, Robert and Eleanor, gave him their unwavering devotion. Julian owned their allegiance, so he set the terms. 2 weeks before that phone call, we were at a stuffy seafood restaurant on the Boston Harbor, where the bill costs more than a mortgage payment. Ethan and I were squeezed into the corner of the booth, nursing glasses of water. Julian held court at the head of the table, loudly critiquing the wine list. "So, Ethan!" he boomed, so the nearby tables could hear him. "Still digging through old books for a living? When are you going to get a real career?" "A man your age should be building a stock portfolio, not a library." My father coughed out a pathetic little laugh, trying to impress the man who was paying for his lobster. My hands balled into fists under the table. I opened my mouth to say something, but Ethan placed a calm, solid hand on my knee. He didn't look hurt. He didn't even look bothered. He just looked at Julian like a historian observing a particularly gaudy, uninteresting artifact. "History has its rewards," Ethan said, his voice even and quiet. "It teaches you to spot the fakes!" Julian just scoffed. "Right. Well, in my world, we build the future. Take my new waterfront development project. We're putting up a massive new biotech campus, state-of-the-art labs, luxury condos, the whole 9 yards. It's going to completely revitalize the South Harbour." My mother leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with manufactured awe. "That's incredible, Julian! You're such a visionary!" "I do what I can, Eleanor," he said, draping an arm around Sophia's shoulders. "The only hiccup is a small property dispute. We have the funding, we have the city permits. But the main access road needs to go through an old adjacent shipyard, and the owner is some old-world dinosaur who refuses to sell." "A dinosaur?" my father asked, desperate to be included in the conversation. "Some old fossil sitting on a gold mine," Julian grumbled, gesturing with his fork. "He won't give us right of way, won't even meet with my team." "He doesn't understand progress. He's a relic blocking billions in development just because he likes his quiet harbour view. My lawyers will find a way to take it from him." "You can't stop what's coming." Ethan took a slow sip of water. "Some people just value a quiet harbour more than a loud investment," he said, almost to himself. Julian sneered. "Words of a man who's never made real money." "Real money builds things, Ethan." Sophie, tired of her husband getting all the attention, tapped her fork against her wine glass. "Speaking of building things and big announcements," she chirped, her voice suddenly bright and loud. "Julian and I are throwing a huge anniversary gala. We have some major investors flying in that we absolutely have to impress." My mother clapped her hands together. "Sophie, a party! What a wonderful idea! When were you thinking?" Sophie looked directly at me, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "This Saturday, May 24th. I know it's terribly last minute, but it's the only time the investors could make it, so we just have to do it." The table went dead silent. May 24th was my wedding day. The invitations went out 6 months prior. My parents said nothing. They didn't even flinch. My father just stared intently at his plate, while my mother immediately began damage control. "Well," my mother said, her voice tight, "that will certainly be a full day. We can attend both, I'm sure of it, right, Robert?" "Of course," my father agreed, much too quickly. "A big day for the whole family." I just sat there, my blood running cold. This wasn't a scheduling conflict. This was a statement. Sophie chose that date deliberately to make our parents choose, to remind everyone who was really in charge. She wanted to prove, once and for all, that her lavish party was more important than my marriage. It was a power move, designed to humiliate me and put me back in my place. When the dinner from hell was over, we stepped out into the frigid Boston air. We walked to the valet where Julian S. brand new, bright red Porsche was waiting, gleaming under the lights. Next to it was Ethan S. sensible 5-year-old sedan. Julian hit the button on his key fob, and the Porsche chirped obnoxiously. "Get home safe," he called over, his voice dripping with condescension. "Wouldn't want that thing to break down." Ethan walked calmly past the driver's side of the sports car. He stopped for a second and glanced at Julian S. wrist, at the ridiculously expensive-looking watch he'd been flashing all night. He looked at the watch, then he looked directly at Julian. "Nice watch, Julian," Ethan said casually. "The Patek Philippe Grand Complication, isn't it?" A truly stunning timepiece. Julian froze mid-stride. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of pure terror. His hand stopped just short of the car door handle. "It's a business expense?" Julian snapped back, his voice suddenly sharp and defensive. "A smart investment." "Very smart," Ethan agreed, giving him a knowing smile. "Have a great night." We got into our car. Ethan started the engine, and as we pulled away, I saw Julian in the rearview mirror, still standing beside his car, not moving. He looked completely shaken that some quiet history professor just identified the $1,000 counterfeit watch on his wrist. I leaned my head against the window, watching the city lights blur past. I kept thinking about dinner, about that smug look on Sophia's face, and how our parents just caved. My sister is like a hothouse flower. She has to have constant attention, endless parties, and fresh compliments to look alive. She needs fancy cars and a flock of admirers just to feel real. Take that away, and she'd wilt. I've spent my life designing gardens. I know true strength grows underground, quiet and unseen. I was building roots, the kind that can survive a harsh Colorado winter. They thought I'd just wither without their approval. They had no idea what was about to hit them. Just 2 days before my wedding day, my design studio smelled of charcoal and pine. I sat at my drafting table, carefully setting pressed alpine flowers into glass frames for the centerpieces. This was my sanctuary. Here, I was in control. Lines could be redrawn, plans remade, beauty could be grown, but outside, my life was spinning. My phone vibrated on the table. The screen flashed Jessica Moore. Jessica managed the Aspen Mountain Lodge, where Leo and I were supposed to get married in 48 hours. She was also a friend who sold my floral prints in the lodge's gift shop. I wiped charcoal dust from my fingers and hit accept. "Clara, you need to listen to me," Jessica said, her voice sharp, stripped of its usual warmth. It was pure business. "Your brother-in-law, Marcus, is in my office. He just dropped a thick envelope of cash on my desk and told me to name a price, to cancel your wedding and book the entire lodge for this Saturday." My hand just froze in the air. The audacity of it felt like a physical blow. He wasn't just trying to throw a bigger party than ours. He was literally trying to buy our wedding venue out from under us. "What did you tell him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I told him our contracts are ironclad," Jessica said. He laughed and said, "Everyone has a price." He offered $10,000 cash to cancel your booking and give the entire place to his people. I told him to leave or I'd call security. "Clara, he's in the lobby on his phone right now. You need to handle this." "Don't sign anything, Jessica. I'm on my way." I hung up, ripping off my work apron. My gloves hit the table with a smack. Marcus actually thought his money could just erase common decency. He figured he could write a check and make me vanish. I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the studio, blinking in the harsh Colorado sun. As I reached my car, a polished black Escalade glided up my driveway. The SUV stopped perfectly, its engine a low, rich hum. The driver's door swung open and Ava Sterling got out. Ava was Leo's older sister, a shark of a corporate lawyer from New York who ate hostile takeovers for breakfast. She wore a tailored suit that radiated power, and her eyes missed nothing. Ava had built a career dismantling arrogant men in boardrooms before they even had their morning coffee. "Get in," Ava said. Her voice was quiet, but it wasn't a request. I stopped in my tracks. "How did you know? Leo called me?" Ava said, opening the passenger door for me. "He handles the mountains. I handle the problems. And your brother-in-law is a problem. Get in the car, Clara. Let's get lunch. You look like you need it. And we need to draw some lines in the sand." I slid into the rich leather seat. The car smelled of money and expensive perfume. Ava pulled back onto the road, driving toward downtown Aspen with the kind of intense focus she probably used on legal contracts. We arrived at a pricey bistro on the main drag the kind with exposed wood beams, low lighting, and waiters who know your coffee order. Ava requested a corner booth with a clear view of the door. She ordered a simple salad and an espresso. I ordered a sandwich I knew I couldn't possibly eat. "Your family thinks your boundaries are a challenge," Ava stated, getting straight to it. "This isn't just them being careless. This is a deliberate strategy. Your independence is a threat to their entire world. Marcus controls your parents with his money. You don't need it, so he can't control you, and he absolutely hates it. I traced a line through the condensation on my water glass. I know, I just never thought he'd sink this low. Trying to buy out my wedding venue 2 days before the ceremony, it's just insane. It's desperation, Ava corrected me. Truly powerful people don't need to flash wads of cash. He's doing this because his entire house of cards is about to come crashing down. Before I could respond, the bell over the restaurant door jingled. I looked up and my stomach plummeted. Sophia walked in with our mother, Eleanor, trailing behind her. They were both clutching shopping bags from an expensive designer boutique nearby. Sophia wore a ridiculously expensive coat, her hair coiffed to perfection. She scanned the room and her eyes locked onto our table. A slow, self-satisfied smirk spread across her face as she sauntered over, towing our mother along like an accessory. "Clara, what a surprise to see you here," Sophia sang. Her eyes flicked to Ava, instantly assessing the power suit and the confident posture. We were just picking up some final touches for our party. The guest list is growing by the hour. Marcus's business associates expect a certain level of class. "You know," she looked at my untouched water glass with fake pity. "Such a shame your little wedding doesn't have the budget for a real florist. But I suppose local wildflowers are charming in a rustic, backwoods sort of way." My mother offered a weak smile, avoiding my eyes. Before I could snap back, Ava raised a single, perfectly manicured hand and placed it gently on the table. The small movement silenced everyone. "You must be Sophia," Ava said, her voice as smooth and cool as silk. "Leo has told me all about you." Sophia puffed up, adjusting her designer bag. "Oh, well, I hope he only had good things to say." Ava smiled, but it was pure ice. "You mentioned your husband is in luxury property development. A fascinating business. I'm in corporate finance myself, back in New York. We see a lot of developers just like Marcus." Sophia's smug expression faltered for just a moment. "Like Marcus?" "Yes," Ava continued, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "The kind who are over-leveraged, who use secondary lenders to cover the gaps in their primary financing. It's a dangerous game. You miss one payment, break one tiny covenant in the loan agreement, and the lenders call in the whole debt. The leased cars disappear. The country club membership is revoked. The entire illusion just vanishes." Sophia's smile was completely gone. The colour drained from her face, leaving her looking washed out beneath the expensive makeup. She blinked rapidly, her gaze darting between Ava and me. "I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus is incredibly successful. He's about to close a massive deal this weekend." "I'm sure he is," Ava said, calmly taking a sip of her espresso. "But I'm just a lawyer. I read financial filings, not press releases. Enjoy your party decorations, Sophia. I certainly hope they last." Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out. She shot a panicked look at our mother, grabbed her arm, and practically fled the restaurant. The bell on the door chimed as they escaped. I just stared at the empty space where they'd been, my heart hammering in my chest. I had never seen anyone dismantle my sister's ego so quickly, so completely, and without ever raising her voice. "That," Ava said, setting her cup down, "is how you handle a bully. You never raise your voice. You don't argue over the little things. You simply and quietly show them how close they are to falling off the cliff." I looked at Ava with a mix of awe and a deep, profound sadness. My own family was trying to destroy my wedding, and this woman, a near stranger, was my only line of defense. "You have to build a fortress, Penny," Maya said, her corporate voice gone, replaced by something warmer, "because they will keep taking from you until there is nothing left." I looked down at my hands, at the dirt still under my fingernails from my work. I know I have to cut them out of my life. I know they're toxic, but some small, stupid part of me still wants my dad to be the one to walk me down the aisle. I just want him to pick me, just this once. Maya reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was strong and warm, a silent vow. "We protect our own, Penny. Your father has a choice to make, and if he chooses wrong, I promise you the entire Thorne family will be your shield. You will not walk to that altar alone." We finished our lunch in a comfortable silence. Maya drove me home, the tires of her Navigator crunching on my gravel drive. I thanked her, feeling a bit more solid, as if I'd been given a suit of armor. But as I stepped out of her car and looked toward my greenhouse, I froze. A battered old pickup truck was parked near the loading bay. An older man in a dusty Stetson and a canvas work coat was standing there, studying a tray of my sage plants. He could have been any old ranch hand, the kind that fades into the Montana landscape. But I knew exactly who he was, and right on cue my phone lit up with a text message from my father. This day was far from over. I walked over to the old town car idling by my Bakery S delivery entrance. The man inside was Arthur Vance. To most people, he just looks like some retired sea captain, weathered face, a simple navy peacoat and worn leather shoes. But he was infinitely more than that. My parents met him once and dismissed him as some old dock worker. They had no clue Arthur Vance owned the port, the land it was on, the bank financing its expansion, and half the prime waterfront real estate in Seattle. He was a shipping billionaire who preferred talking about tides over attending galas. We'd met 2 years prior. Arthur has a life-threatening allergy to most grains, and his dogs said a proper birthday cake was impossible. I spent 3 weeks developing a new baking process using rare, milled botanicals and nut flours. It worked. He had his first slice of cake in 30 years. My family calls my bakery my cute little cupcake business. But that business earned me the quiet, unshakable loyalty of the most powerful man in the city. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Chloe," Arthur said, his voice a low octave baritone. "Just wedding jitters, Arthur. You know how it goes." He didn't believe me for a second. His sharp eyes cut right through my forced smile. "I came for the weekly pastry order," he said, gesturing to a box on the counter. "But I have time for an espresso if you need an ear." "You seem troubled." I poured him a cup from the machine in my office. We stood there in the warm, vanilla-scented air. For months I'd been swallowing my pain, being the good daughter, but today's betrayals, combined with this simple act of kindness, was too much. The floodgates opened. I told him everything. I told him my father was no longer walking me down the aisle. I told him about the fundraisers they were hosting to deliberately overshadow my wedding day. I explained how my dad was siding with my brother-in-law over his own daughter. Arthur just listened, no empty platitudes. He just sipped his espresso, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "This brother-in-law, what's his name again?" Arthur's voice had a new, colder tone. "Julian," I sniffled. "Julian Croft. He runs a tech startup. My parents are heavily invested, so whatever Julian wants, Julian gets." Arthur didn't respond. He just set his cup down on the saucer with a quiet click. A flicker of icy recognition crossed his face. He tilted his head slightly, putting the pieces together. "Julian Croft," Arthur repeated. "The one behind that obnoxious Streamline Logistics startup. Needs my Warehouse 7 for his launch." I just stared at him, stunned he knew the name. Yes, he was just complaining about some stubborn old fossil blocking his company's progress. A slow, chilling smile formed on Arthur's lips. It was the kind of smile that signals a coming storm. He pulled out a thick money clip and laid the cash on the counter for the pastries. "Keep it," he said, adjusting his collar. His eyes met mine, and they were full of steel. A father is meant to protect his daughter's future. If he won't do his job, someone else will. He gave a slight nod, took his box, and headed for his car. I watched him drive away, and a sudden realization hit me. Julian's old fossil problem was about to have a very bad day. I barely had a second to absorb that when my phone buzzed. It was a new message from my father. I unlocked it, a foolish part of me hoping for an apology. Instead, I read a text that laid his conditional love bare for me to see. He wrote that there was a delicate situation. Julian's key investors needed priority seating at the reception. He suggested I uninvite the Vance family, my future in-laws, to create space for them. If I refused, he would pull his $1,000 contribution to the wedding cake. "We must be strategic," the text ended. I had to read it twice. My father wanted me to kick out my own future family, the kindest people I knew, for a bunch of venture capitalists. And he was blackmailing me over $1,000 for a cake I was baking myself. He actually thought that would work. He assumed the threat would make me crumble, just like it always did with my mother. He truly believed I'd trade my dignity for his pathetic contribution. I didn't get angry. I didn't text back a long, wounded essay about his betrayal. Why argue with a man who thinks love has a price tag? So I just put my thumbs on the screen and typed one word, no, and I hit send. I didn't even wait for a reply. I walked into my office, opened a desk drawer, and pulled out my business checkbook. With a steady hand, I wrote the name, Robert Miller. In the box, I wrote 1,000, and on the memo line, I wrote wedding cake refund. I tore out the check, folded it once, and slid it into a crisp business envelope. I wrote my father's address on the front, put a stamp on it, and left it with the outgoing mail. My father thought $1,000 bought him the right to dictate my guest list. He thought it gave him the power to insult the people I loved. By returning his money, I was cancelling his access to my life. I didn't need his transactional gestures for my wedding, and I definitely didn't need his permission to stand by my new family. That envelope on my desk was the ashes of a bridge I had just torched, and it felt glorious. I had finally drawn a line. I had said no, but I knew my family. Fighting back only ever made them escalate. My mother, Catherine, was supposed to come with me to my final dress fitting the next day. It was the one traditional thing we'd planned together. I stared at the envelope on the desk, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. My father would receive my message in the morning. He would know I chose my new family over Julian's ambitions, and I knew with absolute certainty that my mother's attendance at that fitting would be the next casualty. The morning of the fitting was clear and sunny, the kind of Seattle day I usually loved. Not today. Today the brightness just felt harsh. I was standing in my bedroom, staring at the text my mother had sent 15 minutes ago. "So sorry, darling," it read, "but your sister Olivia is having an absolute crisis. Apparently, the stylist for the fundraiser had cancelled, and my mother had to go across town to fix it. You know how she gets about these things, so she couldn't make the fitting. You'll look beautiful in anything," she added. "Send pictures!" I stared at the screen until the letters swam. A hairstylist. My mother was blowing off our only bridal moment because my 30-year-old sister had a tantrum for a party intended to wound me. I didn't even reply. I just locked my phone, grabbed my purse, and drove to the bridal boutique in Belltown by myself. The salon was gorgeous, all champagne silks and soft glowing lights. The owner, a chic woman named Isabel, greeted me with a kind smile that made the ache in my chest feel 10 times worse. I slipped into the gown, a silk crepe column with delicate hand-embroidered floral details on the bodice. It was perfect. Isabel helped me onto the pedestal in front of the 3-way mirror. "Where is your mother today?" she asked softly as she adjusted the train. She was so looking forward to seeing the final version. "She had a family emergency," I said, my voice holding steady. In the mirror, I looked like a bride, but standing there all alone, the armor I'd been wearing for weeks finally started to crack. I realized I was grieving for people who were still alive. I was mourning the parents I deserved, not the ones I had. The ones who always put my sister's manufactured drama before my life's biggest milestones. One hot tear escaped and slid down my cheek. I squeezed my eyes shut, furious at my own weakness. Just then, a soft chime announced the boutique door opening. I heard the soft, determined click of heels approaching. "You look absolutely stunning, Chloe," a calm voice said. I opened my eyes. Eleanor Vance stood in the doorway of the suite, a classic trench coat over a tailored dress, holding 2 lats. "Eleanor," I whispered, quickly brushing the tear away. "What are you doing here?" "Liam mentioned your mother had a last-minute conflict," Eleanor said. Her voice was even, but her sharp eyes saw everything. "I was finishing a meeting nearby and thought you might like a second opinion on the final alterations." She walked over, handed me a coffee, and then stood back to take in the dress. She didn't offer pity or ask what happened with my mother. She simply stepped into the void with her powerful, calming presence. "The embroidery is exquisite," Eleanor said with a decisive nod. "It's elegant and strong, like you." Isabel, could we perhaps take the waist in just a fraction of a centimetre? It needs to be perfect. For the next hour, Eleanor was the mother I desperately needed. She gave her opinion on veil lengths, discussed shoes, and offered sincere, intelligent compliments. When Isabel brought the final invoice, I reached for my wallet, but Eleanor was quicker. She had already passed Isabel her black card. "Eleanor, no," I started, my face flushing with embarrassment. "I can pay for it. You've done more than enough." Eleanor turned to me, her expression softening but still firm. "Put your wallet away, Chloe. It's done." "But I can't ask you to do that," I insisted. "You didn't ask," Eleanor said simply as she signed the slips. I offered, "You're marrying my son in 2 days. That makes you my family. And the Vances? We protect our own. Your mother made her choice today. And now I've made mine. Now, let's go get some lunch before the rehearsal." The rehearsal dinner was that evening at a stunning restaurant on a pier overlooking the Sound. The atmosphere was perfect for Liam and me, cozy, personal, and filled with laughter. The entire Sterling family was there. Aunts, uncles, and cousins flew in from New York and LA to pack the Mountain Lodge. They were all brilliant doctors, artists, tech founders, but so welcoming, treating me like I was already part of the family. Yet 4 empty chairs at our main table were a glaring hole. My parents, my sister, and Ethan hadn't arrived yet. For an hour I smiled and thanked Liam's relatives, trying hard to ignore the empty space on my side of the room. I kept glancing at the grand entrance, just praying my father would appear. The main course was served, but those doors stayed shut. I excused myself, needing a quiet moment in the restroom. Inside a stall, I pulled out my phone just to check the time, but muscle memory took over and I opened Instagram. The first story was from Sophia, posted 30 minutes ago. It showed a private table at Aspen's most exclusive steakhouse. The scene was lavish prime cuts of steak, giant seafood platters, and bottles of vintage champagne. Seated around the table were Ethan's wealthy investors. And right across from Sophia, my own parents, Marcus and Elena, were raising their glasses in a toast. So they weren't just late. There was no car trouble. They had made a choice. They chose a business dinner for Ethan's partners over their own daughter's rehearsal dinner. I just stared at my phone, the image searing itself into my memory. And Sophia's caption at the bottom? That was the final twist of the knife. "Family is who funds your vision. Here's to building empires." A cold, heavy feeling settled in my stomach. The last shred of hope I had for my family simply vanished. I screenshotted the post and immediately saved it to my evidence album. The file was getting thick with their documented betrayals. I washed my hands, reapplied my lipstick, and walked back into the dining hall. I didn't feel defeated, I felt focused. Liam was waiting near the massive stone fireplace. He saw the shift in my expression instantly. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just wrapped his arms around me in a long, silent embrace. "They're not coming," I mumbled into his shirt. "They're at a dinner with Ethan's backers. Sophia posted it." Liam stepped back slightly, his kind eyes turning hard as steel. "Let me see." I handed him my phone, the screenshot still on the screen. He analysed the photo, the expensive meal, my smiling parents, and that arrogant caption. A nerve pulsed in his jaw. The relaxed, easygoing nature lover I knew was gone. In his place stood the man who'd fought and won ruthless corporate battles. He gave my phone back, pulled out his own, and said quietly, "One moment." I watched as he walked down a quiet corridor toward the resort's offices. He raised the phone to his ear. I followed, hiding just out of sight, because I had to know what was happening. Liam's voice was low, but carried absolute command. "Daniel, it says Sterling. Pull up the Red Mountain Project, Ethan's commercial development in Aspen." "Yes, that one." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. "I don't care about the profit margins," Liam said, his voice dropping to ice. "He's been overextended on his credit lines for 3 months. We were giving him a break because of Chloe. That grace period ends now." Another pause. "Call the note," Liam commanded, "and execute the breach of contract clause. Immediately. Start the foreclosure process on that commercial property first thing Monday. And Daniel? Make sure his primary lender knows exactly how deep in the red he is. Let's see how many investors stick around when his entire portfolio collapses. Liam ended the call and slipped his phone into his pocket. He turned and saw me standing in the shadows. He didn't look guilty in the slightest. He looked like a man who had just neutralized a threat against his wife. He walked to me, wrapped an arm around my waist, and led me back to the warm dining room filled with his family. "We're done giving him free passes," Liam murmured, leaning in to kiss my forehead. "The fantasy ends on Monday. Now, let's go enjoy our evening with the family that actually showed up." The next morning, sunlight filled the bridal suite at the Aspen Botanical Gardens. The room was cool and smelled of pine, lavender, and the clean, earthy scent of the mountain air. The entire suite was designed for tranquility. I sat in a plush armchair as the makeup artist applied her final touches. The woman in the mirror looked composed, serene, and absolutely ready. Olivia stood near the window, studying a legal document on her tablet with fierce concentration. Her sapphire blue dress was a striking contrast to the rustic wood of the room. The atmosphere was so calm, completely free of the signature chaos my family always brought with them. My phone buzzed on the marble vanity. The screen lit up. A new message from my mother. I picked it up. The message read, "Morning, darling. That breakfast with Ethan's partners went very late. We're on our way now. We'll just take seats in the back near the exit so we can slip out after the I-do's. Sophia needs help with decor for her charity gala tonight. The planners are a mess. Don't want to be in your way. So excited to see you." I read the text twice. A year ago, a message like that would have absolutely shattered me. I would have replied instantly, begging them to stay, promising to change my plans, doing anything to earn their attention. But now, the words felt empty. They had lost their power to wound me. This was the final confirmation of a childhood delusion. My own mother was treating my wedding like a minor inconvenience, just another item on her to-do list before her real priorities began. Choosing the back row wasn't just practical for them. It was a clear statement of how little they cared. I set my phone down. Not a single tear fell. I didn't even bother to write back. Instead, I opened my private banking app. I scrolled right past my thriving floral design business accounts and tapped into my personal checking. I went straight to the pending transactions, and there it was, glowing on the screen. Check number 305 for $500, made out to Marcus Ramirez. He had threatened to cancel even this pathetic contribution if I didn't disinvite Liam's parents to make room for Ethan's investors. I tapped the stop payment button. A pop-up asked for a reason. I typed 4 simple words. "Service is no longer required." I pressed confirm. The screen flashed a green check mark. That financial chain was broken. It was a tiny sum of money, but the symbolic act felt enormous. I was officially done with their version of love for sale. I locked my phone and placed it inside my wedding clutch. From the suite's second-floor window, I had a perfect view of the main gravel lot below. I heard the crunch of tires on stone. Ethan's black G-Wagon pulled into a reserved space near the gate, kicking up a small cloud of Colorado dust. My father got out, fiddling with his tie and sneering at the venue's rustic charm. My mother emerged next, holding her gown away from the dirt with a look of utter contempt. Sophia stepped out last. She wore a floor-length beaded gown in a pale shade of gold that was dangerously close to white. A classic, desperate move to steal focus. Ethan locked the car, and its loud chirp broke the morning quiet. As my family started for the Iron Garden gates, a procession of black Suburbans rolled into the lot, moving with perfect, silent coordination. These weren't rentals. They had government plates and an unmistakable air of quiet power. Men and women in expensive, tailored suits began to exit the vehicles. I recognized a few from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. One was a tech billionaire famous for his ruthless acquisitions. Another was the CEO of a massive private equity firm from New York. Several of Chicago's top lawyers, all friends of Olivia, also appeared. My father stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide as he stared at the arriving guests. He puffed out his chest and turned to my mother, a smug, self-satisfied grin spreading across his face. "Look at that, Elena," Marcus said. his voice loud enough to carry on the still morning air. Ethan's people. He must have invited them to show off what a major player he is. He's such a good man for Sophia, bringing this kind of power to a little garden wedding. My mother nodded enthusiastically, taking my father's arm. They swaggered through the gates, radiating a completely misplaced sense of pride, absolutely certain these titans of industry were here for a failing property developer. They had no idea these powerful figures were here to celebrate Liam, the man they'd dismissed as some broke mountain guide. The heavy oak door of my suite swung open. Anna, the wedding planner, stepped in, clipboard in hand. "It's time, Chloe," she said with a warm, reassuring smile. Olivia came over and gently adjusted the lace train of my dress. She gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze before she went upstairs to claim her seat in the front row. I gathered the silk of my gown, stepped out of the suite, and began my descent down the grand wooden staircase. In the garden below, a string quartet started a soft melody that floated over the perfectly manicured grounds. I reached the massive doors of the grand hall. They were still shut, a barrier between me and the 150 guests inside. I stood there, clutching my bouquet of white hydrangeas and silver-dollar eucalyptus, utterly alone. My father wasn't by my side. There was no steadying arm, no last-minute words of fatherly pride whispered in my ear, only the soft rustle of my dress on the cold stone. I closed my eyes, breathing in the crisp aspen air, steeling myself. I was about to open those doors and confront the void my family had left. I braced for all those sympathetic looks as I walked that aisle by myself. Then a shadow fell over the stone beside me. Someone had stepped up, blocking the bright morning light. I turned, and the air left my lungs. The string quartet began playing a powerful, haunting melody. The music swelled, drifting over the manicured lawns and filling the clear mountain air. From behind those heavy doors, the sound was beautiful and terrifying all at once. It was my cue. I gripped my flowers so tightly the stems felt cold and wet against my skin. My heart pounded in my chest. For the past 2 days I had convinced myself I didn't care, that I didn't need their blessing. But in that moment, just seconds from the aisle, the loneliness almost broke me. I was ready to walk alone, ready to endure 150 pairs of sympathetic eyes as I made that long journey without my father. And then that shadow fell across the stone. A scent of expensive cologne and fine leather cut through the fragrance of the gardenias. I turned, and my heart stopped. Arthur Vance was standing next to me. He wasn't in his usual rugged blazer and riding boots. The real estate titan was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that fit him like it was custom-molded armor. He radiated the kind of quiet, absolute power that commanded respect without a word. He was 70, but he stood as tall and straight as an aspen pine. "Arthur?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" He turned, his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "I told you, Clara. A father's job is to make the way clear." He paused. "If yours refuses, it would be my great honor to step in." Then he offered me his arm. The gesture was so simple, but it anchored me instantly. My panic vanished, replaced by a powerful wave of gratitude. I took his arm, feeling the steady strength of the man who became my mentor when my own family abandoned me. "Ready to show them what true courage looks like?" Arthur asked, his voice a low, steady rumble. I nodded, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "I'm ready." The huge wooden doors swung open. Afternoon sunlight flooded the hall, blinding me for a moment. Then the scene came into focus. The garden was breathtaking. Rows of white chairs on a perfect green lawn were filled with guests buzzing with anticipation. At the end of the aisle, beneath an arch of white roses, stood Julian. He looked incredible in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes locked on mine, promising a lifetime of love. We took our first step forward. I felt the change in the atmosphere right away. The polite hush of the crowd was broken. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a collective gasp that rippled through the guests like an electric current. My gaze fell on the back row. My father, Richard, sat there, arms folded, rigid with anger. He'd chosen a seat near the exit, a smug expression on his face, ready to witness my shameful solo walk. He wanted me to feel the sting of his rejection, But instead, Richard saw me on the arm of Arthur Vance. I saw the exact second my father recognized who it was. His smug look evaporated, replaced by pure, unfiltered panic. The colour drained from his face, leaving him looking grey and ill. He actually recoiled in his seat, trying to become invisible. The man he'd dismissed as a has-been was the most powerful developer in the entire state, and he was proudly escorting the daughter Richard had disowned. Beside him, my mother Eleanor covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She looked from me to Arthur, and then to my sister, Sophia, who sat bolt upright in her designer dress, her jaw slack with disbelief. But the best reaction came from Marcus. Marcus, the arrogant developer who tried to sabotage our venue. Marcus, who mocked my fiancé and paraded his family's money. Marcus, whose entire new development project now hinged on a stubborn old relic approving a crucial land access deal. His jaw literally dropped. He gripped his chair until his knuckles were white. His eyes shot from Arthur's face to mine as the horrible truth dawned on him. The relic he had insulted, the very man his lawyers were trying to bully, was walking his future sister-in-law down the aisle. In 30 seconds, my family's entire power structure crumbled into dust. Their social standing, their entire carefully crafted illusion of superiority, was shattered by the man at my side. Arthur leaned in, his voice a low rumble just for me. "Your brother-in-law looks like he's chewing on nails," he murmured. I imagine he's re-evaluating his entire approach to that land deal as we speak. A real joyful laugh escaped me. It wasn't a delicate bridal laugh. It was full and genuine, lighting up my entire face. A camera flashed, capturing it all. A bride, beaming with true happiness, walking beside an industry legend. We reached the altar. The music rose to a triumphant peak, and then softly faded. Arthur turned to face Julian. The two men simply looked at each other. There was no competition, no challenging stare. Just the quiet, shared respect of two men who knew the worth of the woman between them. Arthur offered his hand. Julian took it, their handshake firm and steady. "Look after her, Julian," Arthur said, his voice clear enough for the front rows to hear. "She's remarkable. I will, sir," Julian answered, his eyes fixed on mine. "Always." Arthur then stepped back and took a seat in the front row, in the chair reserved for the father of the bride. He sat there, a silent, protective presence. I turned to Julian, placing my hands in his. His warm grip anchored me. The officiant began to speak of love and commitment, but the world just melted away. I didn't glance back at the last row. I didn't have the eyes to know they were sitting there, stunned by the magnitude of their miscalculation. Their entire lives were a house of cards, and a strong wind had just picked up. We said our vows under the vast Colorado sky. The words felt deeper, more meaningful because of everything we'd overcome. When Julian slid the gold ring onto my finger, it felt cool and final. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant announced. "You may kiss the bride." Julian leaned in, and his kiss was gentle, solid, and full of reassurance. The guests erupted in cheers. We turned to face them, our hands linked together, and walked back up the aisle as the new Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. As we passed the last row, I kept my eyes looking forward toward the sunlit gardens. I didn't give Richard, Eleanor, Sophia, or Marcus a single glance. They weren't the main characters in my life anymore. They were just people in the cheap seats, watching a future they had no part in. The ceremony was perfect, but as everyone moved to the cocktail hour, the real drama was only just beginning. My family came expecting to make a quiet exit. They were about to learn that leaving wasn't an option, and that the bill for their pride was coming due. The reception was under a massive tent on the lawn, glowing with hundreds of lanterns. Round tables with white linens encircled the dance floor. And that seating chart was no mistake. It was a carefully drawn map of my new world. My parents, Sophia and Marcus, found their seats at table 19. It was wedged in the absolute furthest corner of the tent, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a server burst through with a tray of food, the door would just graze the back of Richard's chair. For my entire life, my family put me on the fringes. Now they were experiencing that same cold distance. I sat at the head table with Julian, surrounded by his family, local officials, and Arthur Vance. From my vantage point, I watched the Donovan family struggle to look composed. My mother nervously pushed her food around, her eyes scanning the room. Sophia sat stiffly, not even touching her wine, her fancy dress fading into the shadows. But Preston couldn't keep still. His real estate project was hemorrhaging money, his investors were backing out, and the one man who could save him was sitting just 50 feet away. Preston watched Harrison Caldwell get up and head for the mahogany bar. To a man who's drowning, a billionaire ordering scotch looks exactly like a life raft. Preston straightened his tie, left his wife, and wove through the crowded tables. He walked up to the bar with a big, practiced smile, faking the confidence of someone used to forcing his way into exclusive circles. He ordered a bourbon, sliding right into Harrison's personal space. "Mr. Caldwell," Preston said, holding out his hand. "Preston Hayes. I'm married to Isabella, Penelope's brother-in-law. I was hoping to talk to you about that commercial lot on the west side. We have an opportunity that could be very good for both of us." Harrison didn't take his hand. He just stared at Preston like he was a bug on a spotless window. Before Harrison could even answer, a delicate glass clinked on the polished bar top. Maya Thorne had moved between them without a sound. She wore an emerald dress like armor, her posture perfect. "Mr. Hayes won't be talking business tonight, Harrison," Maya said, her voice like silk, giving the older man a warm look. "He has more than enough to worry about with his current debts." Preston frowned and let his hand fall. "Excuse me, but this is a private talk." Maya turned to him, her expression calm, measured, and utterly devastating. "We met once before at the Bistro Preston. My name is Maya Thorne. What I forgot to mention then was my official title. I'm the lead attorney for Thorne Enterprises." Preston just blinked, the name not clicking for a second, and then all the colour drained from his face. Thorne Enterprises was the lender holding the toxic debt for his entire Bozeman project. They owned him. "Yes," Maya went on, her voice quiet enough for only the three of them to hear. "We own your debt, Preston, every last bit of it. And as of last night, you are in breach of your financial agreements." Preston swallowed, feeling the air get tight in his chest. "Your firm, you work for the parent company?" "I do more than work for them," Maya corrected him gently. "It's a family business. My brother is the chief executive officer." Preston's eyes went wide with sheer terror. He glanced wildly across the tent and saw him at the head table, where Elias was laughing with my old college friends. The man Preston had made fun of, the man he called a broke mountain guide, was the CEO who held his entire financial future in his hands. Elias wasn't a guide. He managed the trust that owned the very mountain they were hiking on. "Foreclosure proceedings will begin Monday morning," Maya told him. "I'd suggest you make the most of the open bar while you can." Preston stumbled backward, knocking into a waiter. A tray of glasses shook. Maya just picked up her sparkling water and went back to her table, leaving him gasping for air by the ice buckets. A sharp ring echoed through the tent as a spoon tapped a crystal glass. The talking stopped. Harrison was at the head table, microphone in hand. The room went quiet, waiting for the giant to speak. "Weddings are about new beginnings," Harrison started, his voice carrying easily over the lawn. "Most people see Penelope and they see a lovely bride. I see the most brilliant scientific mind in the entire state." He let that sink in. He didn't sound like a hero saving the day. He sounded like a business partner stating a simple fact. "For the last 6 months, Penelope and I have been working under a strict non-disclosure agreement," Harrison said. Tonight, I'm officially ending it. My company, Caldwell Hospitality, looked for 2 years for a unique botanical formula for our luxury spas all over the world. We tested products from Paris to Tokyo. The only one that met our high standards was made in a small greenhouse right here in Bozeman. I glanced over at my parents' table. Hector was leaning in, his face a mask of total confusion. 6 months ago, Harrison declared, his voice full of pride, Penelope signed a $5 million exclusive supply contract with my company. She did it all on her own. She isn't just a creator, she's a self-made leader in her field. so please raise your glasses to Mrs. Thorne." The whole tent erupted. 150 people jumped to their feet, cheering and clapping. The noise was a huge, roaring wave of approval that washed away years of feeling like I was nothing. Through the applause, I met my father's eyes. Hector Ramirez was still sitting down. The truth of it all was hitting him, and you could see it in the way his face just fell. The daughter he'd called a weed picker, the daughter he wouldn't even walk down the aisle, was a multi-millionaire, respected by the most powerful people he knew. He'd bet his entire family's future on a flashy leased car, throwing away a real diamond just to clutch a piece of shattered glass. Isabella couldn't take it. The applause felt like it was hitting her. She shot up, her chair screeching on the dance floor. She snatched her designer purse and stormed for the exit. Reaching the bar, she grabbed Preston's sleeve and dragged her gasping husband out into the cold Montana night. On Monday morning, I was packing for our trip to Belize. The air in our new home felt clean, smelling of fresh coffee and rain on the way. Liam was at the kitchen island, checking his emails before we had to leave. We were just enjoying the peace of our new life, with no idea that a massive storm was tearing my family apart across town. I had to piece together what happened later, from public filings and local gossip. At 8 a.m., Mark got to his sterile office. His head was throbbing after a weekend of complete humiliation. He slumped at his desk, desperate for some kind of plan to fix things. A heavy, cream-coloured envelope was sitting on his keyboard. The return address was for Summit Ventures. Mark tore it open, expecting an argument about money. Instead, there was just one sheet of paper. It was a final, absolute rejection of his zoning proposal. The legal language was brutal. The board mentioned a total lack of integrity and bad character as reasons for cutting all ties with him, effective immediately. His entire development project was dead. Before the paper hit his desk, his email pinged. It was an official alert from Apex Holdings' legal department. Notice of default. The loans keeping his company afloat were being called in. Every single one. He had 30 days to come up with millions of dollars he did not have. His all-glass office suddenly felt like a fishbowl. Across town, my sister Sophie was in her own little world, fighting a losing battle at the city's fanciest party planner's office. She was trying to fix a bruised ego by throwing a party that would outshine my wedding. She approved imported flowers and a tower of champagne glasses. The planner showed her the final bill. A massive deposit was due immediately to book everything. Sophie pulled out her platinum card with a confident flick of her wrist. The event planner ran it, declined. Sophie gave a nervous laugh, saying it must be a bank mistake. She tried a different card, declined again. Her smile froze on her face. She rummaged in her expensive purse for Mark's primary business card. The planner ran it. The little screen flashed bright red. Confiscate card. The planner pushed the machine away. She said the vendors required payment by noon, or all the bookings would be cancelled. Sophie stumbled into the hallway, her hands shaking as she tried to call Mark. The call went straight to his voicemail. In less than an hour, the planner had emailed the caterer, the florist, and the musicians. The big gala was officially off. In a small town like Aspen Falls, gossip like that travels faster than she could even get to her car. Her social standing evaporated in the time it takes to drink a latte. The final blow landed in a quiet suburban home. Arthur and Eleanor sat in their chairs, their tea having gone cold. The silence in the room was heavy, marked only by a ticking clock. Arthur's pride was hurt, but he truly believed Mark was a genius who just had a minor setback. He was positive Mark would recover and continue to fund their expensive lifestyle. And then their home phone rang. It was Sophie. Her voice was thin and hysterical as she explained the frozen bank accounts and the cancelled event. Arthur tried to sound like he was in control. He told her to calm down and promised to wire money from his and Eleanor's home equity loan to handle it. He hung up the phone, walked to his study, and logged into his online banking portal. He pulled up their property records, expecting to see a lifetime of equity built up. He froze. He just stared at the screen. The numbers made no sense. There was a huge negative against their house. A second mortgage had wiped out every cent they had. Arthur clicked open the loan files, his hands starting to shake. The signature date was a Tuesday night, about 8 months ago. Arthur remembered it perfectly. Mark had come over with a briefcase and an expensive bottle of wine. He spread out a huge pile of documents, claiming he was establishing a special family trust just for them. Mark explained this trust would automatically pay for their country club fees, Eleanor's car lease, and their property taxes. He praised their financial smarts, poured them more wine, and simply showed them where to sign, rushing them so he could lock in the rate. They signed every page without a lawyer, putting all their faith in their perfect son-in-law. The truth was burning a hole in the computer screen. Marcus wasn't funding their lavish lifestyle with his own money. He'd secretly leveraged their house as collateral for his failing company. The leased cars, the country club membership, the fancy dinners they were paying for it, all with debt secured by their own home. He gave them an allowance from their own money to keep them happy and loyal to Chloe. When Eleanor walked in, she saw her husband's face grey and hollowed out. Arthur simply turned the screen towards her. The reality hit them both like a physical blow. They had traded their loyal daughter for a con artist who was stealing their house from under them. The connection they thought was a pipeline to luxury was actually a noose, and Marcus had just kicked the chair out from under them. They had nothing left. Their savings were gone. Their reputation in the community was destroyed, and their home was about to be repossessed. Arthur grabbed his phone, his hand trembling, his breath shallow. He knew only one person in the entire state had the power to stop catastrophe. He scrolled through his contacts, found my name, and prepared to make the one call that would ignite an even bigger fire. That Tuesday morning the mountain light was sharp and beautiful, casting long shadows across our new hardwood floors. Julian and I were in our bedroom, packing for a 2-week honeymoon at a private resort in Bali. I was folding a sundress, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in a long time. The wedding was over, the drama was exposed. And for the first time in my 29 years, I felt free from the crushing weight of my family's judgment. Then my phone started vibrating on the nightstand, a hard, angry buzz that just wouldn't stop. It sounded like an alarm. I put the dress down and went to look. The screen was a blur of notifications, scrolling too fast to read. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and frantic texts. They were all from my family. My father, Arthur, my mother, Eleanor, my sister, Chloe. I unlocked the phone and checked my voicemail. 5 new messages from my father in the last 30 minutes. I hit play on the first one and put it on speaker. Clara? My father's voice cracked, stripped of all its usual arrogance. He sounded weak, desperate, and 10 years older than he was yesterday. Clara, please answer the phone. We are in serious, serious trouble, Marcus lied. He took a second mortgage out on our house. The bank just sent the foreclosure notice. They are going to take everything. I stood there, frozen, as his words sank in. He stopped, gasping for breath. I know Julian's company owns the debt. I know he is the CEO. You have to go to him, Clara. You need to ask him for mercy. We're about to lose the house. We have nowhere else to live. Call me. The message cut off. Then a text from my mother popped up. Clara Vance, why did you warn us? We're so proud of you, sweetie, but we desperately need your help. Marcus's deal fell through, and he is dragging us down with him. Your father is having chest pains from all the stress. Tell Julian to stop the foreclosure. We are your family. Family is supposed to help family. I had to read it 3 times to believe it. There was no apology for abandoning me at my wedding, no regret for skipping my final dress fitting, not one word acknowledging the hurt they caused by choosing Chloe's fake engagement party over my actual marriage vows. Instead, there was just the unbelievable arrogance of their demand. They were drowning in a disaster of their own making, and they just expected me to throw them a lifeline. They assumed the daughter they always ignored would just ring up her tech billionaire husband and have him fix everything. They still believed they had some kind of power over me. They thought my love was a bank account they could withdraw from whenever Marcus's fake money disappeared. Then came a text from Chloe. Clara, Marcus is having a full-blown panic attack. His investors just pulled out. You have to make Julian fix this. We're family. Don't you dare let this happen to me. She wasn't asking me for help. She was blaming me for her husband's collapse. She was furious her perfect narrative was falling apart, that she was no longer the golden child with a rich fiancé, and she actually thought I would just put her right back on the pedestal she'd just crashed down from. Julian walked in then, holding our passports and travel documents. He paused in the doorway, reading the situation. He saw how tense I was, the phone glowing in my hand and the cold, hard expression on my face. He placed the passports on the dresser and walked over to me. He didn't ask what was going on. He already knew. The legal department at his company, Nexus Dynamics, had initiated the margin calls at 9 a.m. that morning. The consequences were now landing right on schedule. They're losing it, Julian said quietly, his tone both clinical and incredibly kind. Yes, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Marcus used their house to finance his property deal. They just got the notice. And now they're asking you for mercy, Julian stated, his eyes locked on mine. He was giving me the stage. He was handing me the power to decide the fate of the people who had completely shattered my heart. What do you want to do? Julian asked. I can call it off. I can even restructure the loan. It's completely your call, Clara. Whatever you need to feel at peace, I will make it happen. I glanced down at my phone. My parents were losing their home. My sister was facing social and financial ruin. My father, the man who refused to walk me down the aisle so he wouldn't upset Chloe, was now begging for a handout from the very man he'd once mocked. I thought about all the school events with empty chairs. I thought about my cancelled dress fitting. I thought about standing alone at the top of that aisle, having to face everyone without my dad beside me. I looked up at Julian. The guilt I'd carried for years simply vanished, replaced by a deep, icy calm. Let them sink, I said. Julian gave a single, firm nod, accepting my decision without a moment's hesitation. He wasn't judging me. He knew that mercy is something you earn, and my family hadn't shown an ounce of remorse. I pressed the power button on my phone. The screen asked me to slide to power off. I slid my thumb across the glass. The screen went black. The endless stream of desperate pleas was finally silenced. I dropped the phone into my carry-on bag and zipped it closed. We drove to the Denver airport in a calm, comfortable silence. We boarded our flight, leaving the freezing Colorado winter far behind. As the plane climbed towards Bali, I watched the world I was leaving behind shrink until it was gone. Back in Denver, the Davies family was trapped in a nightmare of their own design. My father was calling a phone that would never be turned on. My mother was weeping for a home that was no longer hers. Chloe was in a tiny, rented apartment, staring at a husband whose entire life was built on lies and bad debt. They were desperately looking for an escape hatch, completely unaware that I had already used it and had locked the door tight behind me. Their financial safety net was gone, but it hadn't set them free. It had just snapped back and taken them all out. While they picked through the ruins of their fantasy, Julian and I were flying toward a jungle paradise, about to enjoy a victory we had both earned, but this story was far from over. Running away from your family drama isn't the same as ending it. A locked door is only a temporary fix until you have to come back and face the people on the other side, and I was certain they would be waiting for me when I returned. The air in Bali was thick with the smell of flowers, a complete world away from the cold, thin air of Colorado. We were staying in a private villa deep in the rainforest, where the only noise came from the ocean and the jungle birds. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi. The isolation was complete, and for the first few days it was honestly terrifying. For 29 years, my entire nervous system had been tuned to a constant state of anxiety. I was raised to always be ready for the next family crisis, the next emotional storm that would decide if I was worthy of their love or just a burden. My strategy was always to surrender. I made myself smaller, quieter, and more agreeable, hoping that if I demanded nothing, they might finally make room for me. Sitting on our villa's balcony, watching the sunset over the ocean, I could feel the ghost of my phone vibrating in my suitcase. The world around me was perfectly silent, but my mind was screaming. The guilt that comes with finally standing up to your family was a heavy, suffocating weight. I kept imagining my father, the same man who taught me to ride a bike, opening that foreclosure letter from the bank. I pictured my mother packing her life into cardboard boxes. I was safe, in a luxury resort with the man I loved. But that instinct to solve their problems was a powerful current trying to pull me back under. Then Julian walked onto the balcony with 2 glasses of mango juice. He looked relaxed in linen pants and a simple shirt. The ruthless corporate titan who had just torn my brother-in-law's world apart was gone, replaced by the calm, steady man I fell in love with. He put the drinks on the table and sat next to me. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't try to cheer me up with fake positivity. He just sat there in the silence with me, his presence a steady and comforting anchor. "You're waiting for it all to fall apart," Islias said softly, his dark eyes following a bird flying by. "I'm waiting for the guilt to go away," I admitted, my voice almost lost in the sound of the waves. "I keep thinking about their house, the one I grew up in. I know they did this to themselves. I know Preston is a total con artist, but that doesn't change the fact my parents are losing everything, and I could stop it. But I'm choosing not to." Elias turned to look at me. He didn't offer some empty platitude or tell me they deserved it. He gave me something much more real. "Peace isn't about avoiding conflict, Clara," he said, his voice low and solid. "Peace is about having boundaries that don't break. You've spent your whole life thinking that love was something you had to buy. You thought you had to earn your keep by just taking their abuse. What you're feeling now isn't guilt. It's grief. You are grieving the family you should have had, but never did." I just stared at my glass. He was right. The pain in my chest wasn't about wanting to save them. It was the hard realization that even if I saved them, nothing would really change. If I sent them the money, if I paid off their mortgage, they wouldn't suddenly start respecting me. They wouldn't say sorry for leaving me at the altar. They'd just see my money as their new lifeline, swapping Preston's lies for my hard work. The relationship wouldn't get better. It would just start over. "They're going to expect you to fix this when we get home," Elias said, his eyes locked on mine. "They'll use your shared past to try and break down the walls you just built. You need to decide right now who you're going to be when that call comes. Are you going to be the daughter who still needs their approval, or are you the woman who built her own empire?" The question hung there in the thick, humid air. I looked at my own hands. They were the hands of a botanist, strong, capable, and used to creating life from nothing. I had built a $5 million business from the ground up. I had earned the trust of a tech billionaire with nothing but my own skill. I had married a man who saw and loved every part of me. I spent my life cultivating my own garden while my family was obsessed with flowers that were already cut. I had survived my own drought. I didn't have to feel sorry for finally blooming. "I'm the woman who built an empire," I said. The words felt strange at first, but as I said them, they became a solid, unbreakable truth. Elias smiled, a slow, genuine smile that lit up his eyes. "Yes, you are." The change was deep inside me, and it was final. For the next 10 days, I stopped feeling my phone vibrate when it wasn't there. The need to turn it on and check for messages just disappeared. I swam in the ocean, hiked through rainforests, and talked for hours with Elias about our future in Montana. I stopped punishing myself for my parents' choices. I accepted that you can't save people who are determined to sink. Their decisions were theirs to make, and so were the results. I was no longer the little girl begging for a place at their table. I had built my own table, and I decided who got a seat. On the last day of our honeymoon, I packed my dress into the suitcase. I pulled my phone from the bottom of the bag. The cold device rested in my hand. I knew that the second I powered it on, my screen would explode with notifications. Desperate calls, angry messages, and panicked updates about Preston's failing business. I didn't turn it on. I just slid it into my carry-on bag, leaving the screen black. I'd handle it all once we'd touched down in Bozeman on my own schedule and my own terms. And just like that, we were on the jet, flying back to the cold Montana air. I watched the green of the jungle get smaller below. I was returning to the mountains a different person. The fragile girl who craved her father's approval had died a few days before my wedding. The woman flying home was strong, clear-headed, and knew her own power. But as our plane turned north towards Bozeman, a cold dose of reality hit me. Ignoring the family drama was simple with an ocean in between us. The real challenge for my new boundaries was waiting for me back home. My family was desperate, trapped, and had lost all their pride, and a cornered animal will always try to break down a fence before it accepts it's locked out. I knew they wouldn't just call. They were going to start a fight on the very territory I had worked so hard to make my own. The air in my new botanical lab was perfectly controlled, filled with the scent of lavender and rich soil. It was Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after my wedding, and I was in the glass-walled lab looking over a huge shipment for Caldwell Hospitality. The business was growing fast thanks to that $5 million deal, which transformed my little greenhouse into a state-of-the-art facility. Elias was at a nearby conference table, signing the final papers for our new home. Across from him sat Maya Thorne, who had just flown back to manage the final details of a bank takeover. Everything was calm, focused, and productive. That peace was destroyed the moment the main lobby doors flew open. I looked up from my tablet as shouting echoed through the building. My receptionist, Chloe, was backing away from the front desk, holding up her hands to try and calm them down. But storming right past her, breaking all my security protocols, was the Ramirez family. Hector was in the lead, his face flushed, wearing a suit that suddenly seemed too big for him. Vivian was right behind, her expression a mix of fury and panic. Isabella followed them, clutching a designer coat while dragging a shell-shocked Preston by his arm. They looked absolutely broken. They looked like people who had watched their entire world collapse over the last 2 weeks and were finally here to confront the only person who could possibly save them. I didn't run, I didn't scream for security. I just placed my tablet down, straightened my white lab coat, and walked out to meet them. Elias and Maya were instantly on their feet, standing on either side of me like a silent, formidable guard. "Clara!" Hector yelled, his voice breaking when he saw me. "Tell this woman to get out of our way. We're your family." "We don't need a special appointment." "Actually, Hector, you do," I replied. My voice was calm and clear, easily carrying across the huge lobby. "You ignored security. You are trespassing on private property." "Trespassing?" Vivian shrieked, clutching at her chest in a melodramatic way. "We are your parents. We are having an emergency, Clara. We've been trying to call you for weeks. Why is your phone off?" Preston finally broke free from Isabella's hold. He looked genuinely sick. The arrogant developer who'd made fun of Elias's boots was gone. Now he was just a man about to lose everything. He stumbled forward, looking right past me, his terrified gaze landing on Elias. "Elias, please," Preston pleaded, his voice trembling. "You need to stop the foreclosure, the building site, the loan. It's all tied together. If you call in that loan, I lose it all. I'm your brother-in-law now. You can't just do this." Elias simply stared at Preston with the cold, detached look of a CEO evaluating a failed project. He didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. "I'm not your brother-in-law, Preston," Elias said softly. "I'm the CEO of Thorne Enterprises. You betrayed our family. You lied to my face. This mess is your fault because you got caught, Hector, not because you feel any remorse." That was how he saw it, a simple business deal gone wrong. He looked at me, his eyes begging for something that wasn't there anymore. "How can you say family means nothing? Clara, please, we have to stick together. We can fix this. We just have to be strong." He reached out for me. "Strong?" I thought, my voice quiet but sharp. "Don't you dare try to use family to manipulate me now." The audacity was incredible. He just stood there, a failed king in the middle of his own ruins. He pointed a trembling finger right at me. "Clara, this has gone on long enough. You are being a spoiled child who can't let go of a grudge. You will tell your husband to stop this. You owe us. We raised you. We gave you everything. You are not going to let us lose our home because you're throwing a little temper tantrum about a wedding." He said it with so much confidence, like he still had the same emotional control over me he'd had my entire life. He really believed he could just order me to obey him. I looked at the four of them standing there in the lobby of my company. I didn't shout. I didn't break down. The rage I'd held onto for years had finally cooled into something hard and clear. I turned to Maya. "The portfolio, please." Maya opened her briefcase and handed me a thick black binder. Maya handed me the tablet with a firm, knowing nod. I powered it on. The screen lit up with perfect copies of the files from the family cloud drive I'd found. I selected a single document and walked over to Arthur. I didn't just hand it to him. I held it flat in front of his face, forcing him to see it. "That is a screenshot of the text you sent me the night before my firm's funding presentation," I said, my voice carrying through the suddenly silent exhibition hall. "The one that said, 'I'm not coming. Your sister thinks it looks desperate.' You sabotaged my career to soothe her ego, Arthur. That wasn't a business decision. That was a betrayal." Arthur stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open, speechless. I swiped on the tablet and pulled up a banking statement. I walked over to Eleanor, who was trying to become invisible, and held it up. "This is the wire transfer confirmation," I announced, my gaze fixed on my mother's horrified expression, showing Grant attempting to bribe a city official with $10,000 to deny my building permit. He tried to kill my project so Serafina could use the land for a vanity boutique. And you, Eleanor, missed my final pitch to the city board to help her pick out chandeliers for it. Eleanor made a tiny, choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. I turned to Serafina. I swiped to a high-resolution, geotagged photograph. I held the tablet out so she could see her own triumphant face beaming back at her. "This is the photo you posted the night of my big presentation," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "The presentation my entire family ghosted. You were at the Wellington Yacht Club toasting Grant's new fund with vintage champagne. Your caption was, 'Celebrating with the people who matter.'" Serafina looked at the picture, her crocodile tears vanishing as she understood. I had receipts for everything. I stepped back, now shoulder to shoulder with Julian and Maya. I looked at the broken, panicked people who were supposed to be my family. "You came here demanding loyalty, Arthur," I said, as my voice ringing with finality. "But loyalty has to be earned. You gave all of yours to Grant. He bought you with a country club membership and a leased sports car. You gave him power of attorney over your retirement fund. You let him leverage your entire life, and you traded your own daughter for a con man." I glanced at Grant, who was sweating through his designer suit, staring at the floor. "Julian isn't some broke history professor, Grant," I said, delivering the final, devastating blow. "His firm is the primary creditor that owns your entire fund. They hold all your toxic debt, and they own the bank that is foreclosing on your house. My husband's team finalized the acquisition of that bank this morning. Your empire didn't collapse. We just stopped paying for the illusion." The silence in the exhibition hall was crushing. The Vance family had built their identity on a bedrock of reputation, and I had just detonated the foundation. They were left standing in the rubble, utterly exposed. My father looked at me, a desperate, pathetic appeal in his eyes. "Clara, please! What are we supposed to do now?" I looked right through him, feeling absolutely nothing. The daughter who would have done anything to fix this was gone. "You are going to leave my event," I said, my voice cold and calm. "And you're going to figure this out on your own." I turned to my husband, Julian. "Call security. Have them escorted from the premises. If they ever show up again, have them arrested for trespassing." I didn't stick around to watch. I turned my back on all of them, walking toward the architectural models with Julian. The massive glass doors of the hall slid shut behind us, sealing the chaos away. But the shockwave from that confrontation was only just beginning, and the social landscape of Wellington Bay was about to be permanently redrawn, leaving my family with absolutely no one to turn to. Julian raised his hand in a subtle, quiet gesture that brought the event's security team moving. Two men in sharp suits emerged from a side corridor, their faces impassive and resolute. They didn't have to say a word. Their very presence was the physical embodiment of the line I had just drawn in the sand. My father stared at the security guards, then his eyes flicked back to me. The righteous anger that had propelled him into the hall was gone, replaced by a hollow, pitiful shock. He had spent his whole life believing that the title of father was a lifetime pass for any kind of behaviour. He was just now learning, in public, that his pass had been revoked. My mother grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "Let's go, Arthur," she whispered, her voice a faint tremor. The show was over. There was no one left to impress, no emotional leverage left to use. My sister, Serafina, refused to look at me. She stared intently at the polished concrete floor, her body seeming to shrink inside her expensive coat. Her husband, Grant, nearly tripped as they turned for the doors, a man suddenly without an anchor. Julian moved to my side, a solid, comforting presence. He straightened his tie, his attention already shifting back to our guests and investors. The battle was over, but the war was just starting. In a town as small and insular as Wellington Bay, scandal spreads like wildfire. The entire social structure of the city seemed to shift on its axis, reacting to the black hole created by my father's public humiliation. The Monday after the event, the federal fraud investigation into Grant's fund made the front page of the Business Journal. It wasn't a quiet inquiry, it was a loud, spectacular implosion. The immediate result was their swift and merciless ejection from the high society they worshipped. The Yacht Club, an institution that prized reputation over morality, didn't even wait for a conviction. They suspended my parents' membership immediately, citing a breach of the club's code of conduct. The truth was far simpler. The Vance family's perceived influence had vanished, and my parents were no longer considered a useful part of the club's social machinery. Serafina suffered a similar, brutal fall from her pedestal. The museum board she chaired politely requested her immediate resignation. The society women, who had praised her fundraising galas, were suddenly unavailable to take her calls. The shallow friendships she had built on a foundation of status and gossip simply evaporated the second her family's name became toxic. The final crushing blow landed when the bank repossessed Grant's leased convertible and the sprawling modern house they rented in a private enclave. Serafina? The woman who had sneered at my tiny apartment and my workaholic lifestyle was now stuffing her designer clothes into moving boxes. She and Grant were forced into a generic two-bedroom rental on the far side of the city. She was now living the exact hand-to-mouth anxiety she had always believed she was above, and she had to face it without help from her parents, who were being consumed by their own financial nightmare. My mother and father were losing the fight against the foreclosure. The legal notices from the bank were piling up on their marble island, a constant reminder of their ruin. The financial security they thought they had was now the chain dragging them under. About 3 weeks after the confrontation at my exhibit, a thick envelope arrived at my studio. It was marked personal. I sat at my drafting table, staring at the familiar, elegant script of my father's handwriting. It looked unsteady, lacking its usual arrogant flourish. I tore it open and pulled out a 3-page letter. It was a rambling, desperate appeal for a rescue. Arthur wrote about the sacrifices he'd made for us, trying to use nostalgia as a weapon to repair the damage he'd done. He described the imminent loss of their home, the public shame, and the toll it was all taking on my mother's health. He painted himself and my mother as the innocent victims of Grant's sophisticated scheme. He never once apologized for betraying me. He didn't mention the years of quiet sabotage or the campaign to undermine my career. The entire letter was just a self-pitying story constructed to get a bailout from me. He was asking for a loan, a huge amount of money to pay off the bank and save their house. He swore he would pay it all back, a worthless promise from a man who had already sold his soul. I read the whole thing slowly. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction or even the old familiar weight of guilt that had ruled my life for so long. I just felt a deep, quiet emptiness. I set the letter down on my desk. I didn't bother writing a reply, pointing out all their lies. I didn't owe them an explanation. We were long past the point of conversation. I opened a drawer, took out a piece of heavy, cream-coloured cardstock, and uncapped a black ink pen. I thought about the little girl who won the citywide design competition, only to have her father call it a cute hobby. I thought about the daughter whose family actively tried to destroy her wedding day. I thought about how I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, which was never really there. I pressed the pen to the card. I wrote no greeting. I didn't sign my name. I wrote only one simple sentence. I hope you find the peace you never gave me. I folded the card once and slid it into a plain envelope. I addressed it to my parents' home, a home that would soon belong to the bank. I didn't include a check. I didn't offer any help. I walked to the front of the studio and gave the envelope to my assistant, telling her to make sure it went out with the day's mail. I watched the courier pick up the small stack of letters, and I felt the final heavy bolt slide into place. The wall around my heart was now complete. I had finally cut the last toxic thread that connected me to the Vance family. But as I turned back to the lab, ready to dive into a new client project, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Liam. He'd been looking over the final audit of Marcus's collapsed fund and found a hidden account buried deep in the company books, holding a huge sum of money that Marcus had siphoned off before the bankruptcy. The message was short, but the meaning was a bombshell. Marcus wasn't just a bad businessman. He was trying to commit federal fraud, and my parents were listed as the main guarantors on the account he used. The financial implosion was about to go criminal, and the Ashworth family was ground zero. The next Thursday, a bitter, strange frost covered Sterling Hills, perfectly matching the cold reality dawning on my parents' house. The bank had finalized the foreclosure, giving them a hard final deadline to get out. Richard Ashworth, a man who built his entire identity on the size of his house and his country club membership, was now facing the raw humiliation of just trying to get by. Their fridge was practically bare. My mum had spent the morning in tears, polishing silver trays she planned to pawn. The leased car was gone, towed away in the dead of night. My father needed groceries, but his main bank account was frozen, tied to the fallout from Marcus's fraud. He was at his big desk, digging through junk mail, hoping for a stray check or a gift card. In the bottom drawer, stuffed under past due notices, his hand grazed a crisp white envelope. He pulled it out. The postmark was 2 months old, and it was addressed to him in my handwriting. He ripped it open, his fingers trembling slightly. Inside was the check I'd written him in my office, the one from after he threatened to pull his small investment from our wedding venue unless I uninvited Liam's brother. The check was for $500. Robert just sat there, staring at it. For a man who used to pay for $1,000 dinners with my ex's money, $500 was nothing. But right now, it was a week of groceries, gas money to see another loan officer, and a moment's peace from the crushing weight of being broke. He didn't waste a second thinking about the morality of cashing a check from the daughter he'd so badly betrayed. He completely ignored the memo line, which just said, "Venue deposit refund." All his pride had been eroded by pure, grinding desperation. He grabbed his keys, got into his old station wagon, the only car they owned outright, and drove to the bank. The branch was quiet. Robert stood in line, clutching the check, his eyes darting around the room. He could feel phantom eyes on him, imagining that everyone in here knew about his financial ruin. When a teller became free, he walked up to the counter and slid the check across the polished granite. "I need to cash this, please," Robert said, his voice a weak imitation of its old confidence. The teller, a young guy with a polite smile, picked it up. He looked at the account name, then started tapping the numbers into his computer. Robert watched the screen, holding his breath, already mentally portioning out the money for food. The teller paused. He frowned and typed something else. He looked at the check again, at the date, then back at his monitor. "Mr. Miller, I'm so sorry," the teller said, his voice low and full of pity. "I'm afraid I can't cash this for you." A wave of cold dread washed over Robert's chest. "Why? Is the account overdrawn?" "I know for a fact my daughter runs a very successful business. The money's in there." "Oh, the funds are there, sir," the teller confirmed. "But the account holder placed a stop payment order on this specific check." "Stop payment?" Robert repeated, his voice cracking. "When did she do that?" The teller checked the system notes. The order was entered at 9:15 a.m. on August 10th. August 10th. The date hit Robert like a physical blow. That was the morning of my wedding. The exact time. I was reading a text from my mother saying they would sit in the back and leave early to stand with my sister. I hadn't forgotten the check at all. I had cancelled it with cold, deliberate precision, making absolutely sure that financial tie was severed for good before I walked down the aisle. Robert stood there at the counter, the brutal reality of his decisions finally crashing down on him. He had picked Marcus's empty promises over my loyalty, and now all he had was a worthless piece of paper. He took the voided check from the teller, his hands shaking, and walked out into the cold Seattle drizzle with absolutely nothing. While Robert was facing an empty wallet, Marcus was dealing with a much more public kind of humiliation. The bankruptcy had stripped him of every asset, his status in the tech industry, and what little dignity he had left. To pay off a tiny fraction of his massive debts, and to sidestep a deeper federal probe into the shell companies I'd found, the court ordered Marcus to find a steady job immediately. The judge ruled that a large portion of his income would be garnished and sent straight to his creditors, but Marcus's biggest obstacle was his own reputation. The Seattle tech scene is a small, insular world. Everybody knew about his spectacular failure and his shady business practices. No legitimate company would go near a guy who had nearly ruined his own co-founder's family. He applied for senior developer roles, consulting work, anything. He got nothing back but silence and rejections. With the court's deadline breathing down his neck, Marcus had no choice but to take a low-paying job from a temp agency. He desperately needed a paycheck, no matter how degrading the work was. So, on a cold, wet Tuesday, Marcus reported to a massive logistics warehouse on the industrial edge of Tacoma. He wasn't in an expensive designer sweatshirt anymore. He was wearing a bright yellow safety vest, scuffed-up work boots, and a generic company baseball cap. They hired him as a package scanner, a soul-crushing minimum-wage job that meant standing for 8 hours straight, pointing a scanner at barcodes, and making sure boxes went to the right conveyor belt. Marcus clocked in, avoiding eye contact with the other workers, a few of whom probably remembered him from when he drove a brand-new Rivian. He grabbed his scanner and stepped onto the chilly warehouse floor, his ego completely shattered by the kind of manual labor he used to mock. A couple of hours into his shift, sorting pallets with his soft hands already going raw in his cheap gloves, he noticed a line of black sedans pulling up to the main office building. Marcus knew those cars instantly. They were the same kind that had shown up at the waterfront hotel on the day of my wedding. The first car stopped at the executive entrance. The driver's door opened and Liam stepped out. He was in a perfectly cut navy overcoat, looking every bit the architectural titan he was. A few of his partners followed, carrying large, rolled-up blueprints. Marcus froze, and his scanner clattered onto the concrete. He hadn't even bothered to check who owned the warehouse. He just took the job because he had to. This giant distribution center, the newest and biggest in the state, was a flagship project for Summit architecture. Liam, the man Marcus had dismissed as nothing more than a glorified sketch artist, wasn't just my husband. Liam was the lead architect for this entire project. His firm was the one signing Marcus's pathetic little paycheck. For all practical purposes, Liam was his boss. Liam walked toward the main office, talking about the loading bay designs with the site manager. He wasn't looking for Marcus. He hadn't planned this to gloat. He was just moving across the sites with an easy authority, checking on the real-world progress of his firm's design. As Liam passed the sorting station, his eyes did a quick sweep of the area. He saw Marcus standing there in his yellow vest, looking pathetic and small. Liam didn't even slow down. He didn't smile, and he didn't offer a single sarcastic comment. He just gave Marcus a brief, impersonal nod, the kind a CEO gives a janitor he passes in the hall, and kept on walking. That complete and total indifference was 1,000 times worse than any insult. Marcus just stood there on the cold floor, watching the man he once ridiculed command the very universe he had lost. The karma was vicious, swift, and perfectly fair. The Miller family and Marcus were drowning in the mess they'd made, while Liam and I were just starting our lives. But getting over a toxic family is more than just watching them fall apart. The final part is learning to live in the quiet space they used to occupy, and building boundaries so strong they can't ever get back in to hurt you. 6 months went by, and the perpetual grey drizzle of a Pacific Northwest winter finally broke, giving way to the warm, vibrant green of late spring. I was standing on a beautiful 10-acre piece of land we had found on Bainbridge Island. The property sloped gently down to the water, giving us a perfect, unobstructed view of the Seattle skyline across the Puget Sound. This was the farmhouse Amelia and I had bought, our sanctuary, a life we were building from the ground up, miles from the city's hollow glamour. The soil felt rich beneath my boots, smelling of rain and cedar. Before me were neat rows of vegetable beds, their first green shoots just breaking through the dark earth. The air was crisp, clean, and full of honest work. I moved between the beds, my fingers tracing the lines in the soil. These weren't delicate flowers in a curated display. They were seeds planted deep, meant to withstand drought and grow strong in the summer sun. And in a way, they were me. I reached the edge of the garden where an old stone fence marked our land. I braced my hands on the weathered stone, looking back toward the glittering skyline, and a profound quiet settled in my bones. The constant ping of my phone was gone. That taut wire of anxiety, of waiting for the next crisis call from my family, had finally snapped. In the 6 months since I'd emailed that final, polite goodbye to my parents, the silence from the family was absolute. I still caught whispers through the city's gossip machine, but it was like hearing news about people I used to know. The bank finally took their penthouse back in March. My parents had to lease a cramped condo miles from the high society circles they'd worshipped. My father, with no other options, swallowed his pride and took a junior sales role at a car dealership just to have a paycheck and insurance. Our marriage, which was built on charity galas and press releases, had crumbled after I found that secret ledger. The divorce was fast, ugly, and humiliatingly public. Richard's perfect image was a lie, and now he was desperately trying to salvage his reputation and his venture capital fund. It was a daily headline of his spectacular failure. I left our cold, minimalist mansion for a cozy little rental. I was getting by. I was eating, sleeping, and pouring all my energy into my baby, creating a life that was entirely off his map. I once believed setting a boundary meant you had to build a fortress, a defense mechanism designed to lock yourself away so no one could ever hurt you. I was so wrong. Standing there in my new kitchen, I finally understood a boundary is not a wall, it's a gate. And for the first time in my 30 years, I was the one holding the key. I could swing it open for people who brought kindness, support, and real honesty into my world. And I could bolt it shut against anyone who just wanted to drain my spirit to feed their own ego. Richard was locked out. He would never watch our son take his first steps on this land. He'd never eat at the farmhouse table my brother and I restored. He would never feel the peace of this place, because he had proven again and again he had no respect for it. The sound of sharp heels on the lobby floor pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Miss Vance, my attorney, walking toward our meeting spot. She held a single slim folder, her presence radiating a calm, unshakable confidence. Miss Vance was a bulldog disguised as a diplomat. She sat across the table from me. She didn't even open her folder. She simply glanced at the spreadsheets I de-printed out. absorbing the scope of the financial infidelity I'd uncovered in Richard's business. "You've done a remarkable job here, Amelia," Ms. Vance said, her voice even and full of respect. "This documentation guarantees a settlement that will dwarf their initial offer. The partners are panicking." "It was just good data," I said with a small smile. "You just need to know where to dig and what to put." She held my gaze, catching the double meaning instantly. She closed her folder with a quiet click, a sign that our work was done. "Keep building, Amelia," she said. "I'll be in touch Monday with their surrender." She walked away, my silent protector in a city full of wolves. I turned my face back to the sun. Ben was waiting by the entrance, holding 2 cups of hot coffee. He was in his usual faded hoodie and work pants, looking like my big brother who couldn't care less about the glass and steel towers surrounding us. He met me and handed me a cup. The coffee was warm, strong, and is exactly what I needed. He didn't bother asking how the meeting went. He just put his arm around my shoulders, giving me that solid, reassuring presence that got me through the entire storm. I leaned my head against him, closed my eyes, and just felt the morning sun on my face. I was no longer the betrayed wife. I wasn't the woman left waiting for a husband who was never coming back. I was my own person, building a real life from scratch. And standing next to me was the brother who knew what I was worth long before Richard's world came crashing down. People say that time heals all wounds. It's a sweet little phrase for a sympathy card from people who've never felt the gut punch of true betrayal. But healing does to always come from the clock ticking. It comes from finally knowing you don't need the person who broke you. You don't need their validation, their excuses, or their permission to move on. You just need to stop lighting yourself on fire to keep their fantasy alive. If you are listening to this and you in a partnership that makes you feel invisible, if you have spent years making yourself smaller so that someone else could feel powerful, I need you to hear me. You are not obligated to accept cruelty just because someone calls it love. You have every right to stand up, turn around, and build your own damn kingdom. It will feel scary at first. The initial quiet will feel like a storm, but I promise you the peace that is waiting for you on the other side is worth every battle it takes to get there. Have you ever had to lock the gate on a toxic person for good? Did you ever stop waiting for the apology you knew would never come? Share your experience in the comments. I try to read them all because your survival is a story worth telling. You are not alone, and your peace is the ultimate prize. Take care of yourself. We often plant our hopes for a partner in the garden of our own insecurities. We feed them with our own wants, trim them into a perfect shape, and then wonder why the relationship itself has no real roots. The story of Amelia and Richard isn't just about a rich man having an affair. It's a reflection of the modern power dynamic, showing the subtle, toxic ways we can abandon the person we promised to protect. When a relationship is just a list of assets and appearances, love is no longer a bond. It's just a business deal. We forget that our job isn't to create a perfect spouse, but to be a reliable partner. In the quest to project a flawless public image, so many fall into this trap of the trophy partner mentality. We saw it clearly with Richard. He placed Amelia on a pedestal made of superficial things. He financed her life and managed her image, but ignored her soul. But managing a perfect life until you completely detach from reality isn't a sign of strength. It's a critical weakness. By walling himself off from real emotional connection and propping up his ego with money and affairs, Richard became brittle, needy, and empty inside. He moved through the world by buying solutions to his problems, with no moral compass to guide him. Meanwhile, the emotionally starved partner, Amelia, was pushed to the background of their own life. Every person in a relationship deserves an equal voice. That voice should never depend on how well you perform for an audience. We're taught to think that violence leaves physical marks, but emotional abuse leaves deep scars that can last a lifetime. Richard waged a quiet, steady war against her spirit. He treated his wife not as a partner, but as an accessory to improve his social standing. He chose the cheap satisfaction of an affair over the well-being of his pregnant wife and their future child. When a man calls his partner overly emotional for reacting to his deception, he is telling her that her feelings are invalid unless they serve his own story. A true partnership demands emotional intelligence and the willingness to listen instead of just talking. When a partner chooses to be absent during the most important moments of a shared life, they aren't just missing an event. They are breaking a bond that might never be fixed, leaving behind a wound that never quite heals. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own home, or had to find your own strength because your supposed protector abandoned you, you're not on your own. Take a second to subscribe and become part of our community. We tell these stories because claiming your own narrative is the only justice that matters. The deepest lesson from this story is the difference between cut flowers and rooted plants. Our culture loves to praise the cut flower. We celebrate the expensive car, the perfect Instagram feed, the beautiful woman on a powerful man's arm. The affair was exactly that, a cut flower, depending completely on the stolen resources of a broken home and the thrill of being a secret. But a stunning bouquet, no matter how much it costs, is already dying the moment it's picked. Amelia, however, she was the rooted plant. She was pushed aside, forced to survive in the dark, and left to handle every storm by herself. But in that isolation, she discovered her own strength. She developed new skills, built her resilience, and forged a character from steel. So when the harsh winter of financial and social collapse finally hit, the perfect facade was gone in an instant. But the deep roots, they survived and they thrived. A parent's real job is to nurture those roots. As Julian Thorne said in his letters, a father is supposed to clear the path for his daughters. If he won't, he loses any right to stand in her garden. Parents should be protectors and guides, not the very obstacles their children have to conquer, or the people who cash in on their success. As children become adults, the family dynamic itself has to evolve. Modern parenting means teaching your kids the absolute importance of healthy boundaries, which we often confuse with acts of aggression or walls built from anger. Alara learned that a boundary is not a wall built to trap you. It is a locked gate, and you are the one who holds the key. Respect is the currency of any adult relationship. It has to be earned through consistent, honorable behavior, not demanded just because you share a family name. We have to encourage our children to build their own lives on a foundation of competence and ethics, not manipulation and deceit. When we teach them to value their own peace, we give them the armor they need to survive a world that will constantly try to take it from them. The silence that fills a home after a family shatters is heavy and complicated. Betraying a child's trust isn't just a small mistake, it is a fundamental fracture that changes the relationship forever. The Monroe family learned far too late that forgiveness can't just be summoned on demand. It must come with genuine remorse, a deep and honest look at the pain they caused, not just a panicked plea for help when the bank starts calling. Love has to be given freely for who the child is, long before the emotional walls become too high to climb over. As we navigate our own dining rooms and family gatherings, we have to ask ourselves what kind of garden we are actually planting. Are we nurturing roots that will survive the inevitable storms? Or are we just arranging cut flowers, hoping they last one more day? Look at the people sitting with you tonight. Consider the impact of your words and the legacy of your actions. Because eventually, the winter comes for every single one of us, and the only thing left standing will be what we actually took the time to grow.